I never imagined that a simple car ride could shift the way I saw myself, or the way I looked at someone I thought I already knew. It started out like any ordinary day. At least, that's what I told myself when my husband's brother, Mark, pulled up to the curb and leaned across to open the passenger door. But what he said on the road that day caught me completely off guard, and it's a moment I still replay in my heart, wondering how one unexpected conversation could make me question so much about life, love, and the ways we connect with people. Before I share everything with you, let me ask, from which cities are you watching us today? I would truly love to know where you're listening from as I open this little window into my life. The air that afternoon carried that gentle heaviness that comes before rain. I had just finished tidying the kitchen when Mark called, offering to give me a ride to the other side of town. My husband was out of state on business, and Mark, ever the considerate younger brother, didn't like the thought of me taking the bus alone. I'll admit I hesitated. He and I had always been cordial, but we weren't exactly close. Family gatherings kept us friendly, yet there was always a quiet space between us, a polite distance neither of us seemed to cross. Still, something in his voice, warm, insistent, almost protective, made me agree. When I slid into the passenger seat, I noticed details I had never paid much attention to before. The faint scent of cedar from the cologne he wore, the neatness of his car, the way the seat was already adjusted just right for me, as if he had thought of it beforehand. I told myself not to read into it, but when you're alone in a car with someone for the first time, every little detail feels magnified. The ride started simply enough. We talked about the weather, the small chores of the day, and the usual family updates. Mark asked about my garden, remembering how I had once proudly shown him the roses blooming along the fence. I was surprised he remembered. That small detail stirred something inside me, a reminder that he noticed things most people overlooked. As the car hummed along the road, the city outside rolled by in a blur of familiar storefronts and tree-lined streets. The windshield wipers brushed back a light drizzle that had just begun, making everything glisten. The quiet rhythm of the rain matched the rhythm of our words, soft but steady. Mark didn't rush the conversation. He asked questions in a way that felt patient, almost tender, as if he genuinely wanted to understand how I was doing, not just the surface version, but the truth beneath it. "You've been carrying a lot lately, haven't you?" he said at one point, his eyes flicking to me briefly before returning to the road. The question startled me. Most people, even my husband, rarely asked it so directly. I tried to brush it off, but my voice betrayed me with a crack of emotion. "I guess we all carry more than we let on." He nodded, his jaw tightening slightly, as though my words touched a chord in him. Then, almost without warning, he began to share pieces of his own life. Regrets he carried, chances he wished he had taken, the loneliness that sometimes crept into his evenings when the house felt too quiet. I had never heard Mark speak so openly. He always seemed so composed, the dependable younger brother with the easy smile. But here, in the dim cocoon of his car, he was different. Listening to him, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was comfort in hearing his honesty, but also a pang of sadness. I wondered how many times he had driven through these same streets with thoughts bottled up, with no one to share them with. It made me realize how little we sometimes know about the people closest to us, even those we call family. The rain grew heavier, streaking the windows, softening the world outside. Inside, the air felt warmer, heavier too, not in an uncomfortable way, but in a way that made the silence between words feel meaningful. Mark glanced at me again, and his eyes held something I couldn't quite name, a mixture of worry, admiration, and perhaps a trace of longing. I shifted slightly in my seat, suddenly aware of how close we were in that small space. "You know, Nancy," he said quietly, Sometimes I think people underestimate you. They don't see how much you give, how much strength you carry in silence." The words landed in my chest like a weight, but not the kind that drags you down. Instead, it was the kind that makes you pause, makes you breathe differently, as though you've been seen for the first time in years. My throat tightened, and I found myself blinking back the sting of tears. I wanted to respond, to say something that matched the depth of what he had just given me, but the right words didn't come. Instead, I simply placed my hand lightly on the center console, not touching his, but close enough that the gesture carried its own quiet message. "I hear you. I feel it too." The rest of the drive passed in a haze of soft conversation and long, thoughtful silences. By the time we reached my destination, I felt as though I had traveled much farther than just across town. Something had shifted between us, something unspoken but undeniable. When I opened the door to step out, Mark's voice stopped me. "Nancy," he said, "don't forget that you deserve to be seen, not just as someone's wife, not just as part of the family, but as yourself." I froze for a moment, his words echoing louder than the rain outside. Then I turned back to him, meeting his eyes with a gratitude so deep I could hardly speak. I managed a small smile, nodded, and stepped out into the drizzle, my heart heavier and lighter all at once. That night, as I sat by the window listening to the rain, I kept replaying his words. I thought about the look in his eyes, the honesty in his voice, and the unexpected connection that had blossomed in such an ordinary setting. It left me wondering what it truly means to be seen, and why sometimes it takes the most unexpected person to remind us of our worth. The rain eased overnight, but a thin mist still clung to the morning like a shawl that didn't want to be folded away. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching small beads of water roll down the glass and race each other to the sill. Sleep had been a stubborn companion, close enough to feel, just out of reach. When it finally came, it brought Mark's words with it. "You deserve to be seen." The sentence moved through my thoughts like a slow river, changing the banks it touched. I tried to occupy myself with practical things, sorting the mail into tidy stacks, straightening the cushions on the couch, watering the ferns by the back door. Domestic rituals are their own kind of prayer, and for a while they held me steady. But the quiet of the house made the previous day feel louder. I realized I'd been living too long with the volume turned low, on my feelings, my wants, my voice. Not a dramatic silence, just the kind that grows one decision at a time. Say nothing here, smooth things there, save your worry for later. Later had finally arrived. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from Mark. "Just checking in. How are you feeling today?" It was simple and gentle, like tapping lightly on a closed door. I told him I was fine and thanked him again for the ride. He replied that he was heading across town to pick up a part for his lawnmower and asked if I needed anything. I almost said no out of habit, then remembered the pair of shoes I'd meant to exchange at the outlet store near his errand. I told him I could meet him there and that we keep it quick. He sent a thumbs up, and the small steadiness of it settled my nerves. On the drive to the outlet, the sky brightened enough for the clouds to thin into long, pale smears. The parking lot glistened from the night's rain, every puddle holding a patch of sky. I spotted Mark's car under the modest shade of a sycamore. He stepped out as soon as he saw me, a faint smile lifting the corner of his mouth. If yesterday had been the first page of a book, today felt like turning it without creasing the spine. "Trade those shoes?" he asked, nodding toward the bag I carried. "I'm thinking so," I said. I bought them for comfort, then realized I was still pretending to be fashionable. "You can be both," he said. "Most people forget that." We walked inside together, a polite space between us, not forced, not tense, just there. He waited while I spoke to the clerk and tried on a different pair. When I stepped out to show him, he didn't offer the quick, thoughtless praise that people sometimes give just to move things along. He looked carefully at the way I stood, then at my face. "They suit you," he said. "You stand like you can take a longer walk in those." I laughed because it was true and because it was such a beautifully practical compliment. We made the exchange, and when we came back out, the air had shifted from damp to fresh. A diner sat at the edge of the lot, the kind with a chrome stripe and a short row of bar stools that gleamed even from the outside. "Coffee?" he asked. He said the word easily, but the question under it was, "Are we okay? Can we sit without losing the quiet we found yesterday?" "We can," I said, more to myself than to him. Inside, the diner smelled like warm pancakes and the faint spice of cinnamon. We slid into a booth near the window where the light found us in a soft square. A waitress with a red pencil tucked behind her ear set down 2 heavy mugs. The coffee steamed, and the sound of it, the small hush of liquid meeting ceramic, felt ceremonial. We talked about unimportant things at first, how the school up the road had added a new traffic light, how last winter had been kinder than expected. Mark's hands wrapped around his mug, resting, not fidgeting, and I appreciated the way he let the spaces in conversation remain faithful to themselves. No hurry to fill them, no need to impress. Eventually, the talk edged closer to what we both knew waited for us. He cleared his throat softly. "I meant what I said yesterday," he began, his voice lower than before. "I've been thinking about how often we all go unseen in plain sight. It's not anyone's fault exactly. Life gets loud. People get busy." He paused and looked up at me. "Still, I wish we didn't have to wait for a rainy drive to say true things." I felt a knot I hadn't fully acknowledged loosen just enough for breath to move through it. "I've been quiet," I said, "for years maybe. Not unhappy, just quieter than I meant to be." He nodded. "Sometimes quiet is courage. Sometimes it's hiding. Hard to tell the difference when you're in the middle of it." I turned my cup slowly, watching the way the light skimmed the rim. I thought of my husband in hotel rooms, his careful texts between meetings, his face in profile when he read at night. I love him. The sincerity of that truth steadied me. But love can become efficient, and efficiency, left alone, can hollow out tenderness. "Yesterday," I said, "you made me feel seen. I'm grateful for that. I want you to know I'm sure about my marriage. I'm sure of the life I've chosen. I'm also sure I can choose to live it more fully than I have been." His shoulders softened as if I'd set down a weight we were both carrying. "I know," he said. "That's why I could say it to you. I trust you to do right by yourself and everyone else." For a few minutes, we let the clatter of plates and the murmur of other conversations weave around us. A couple at the far end of the counter shared a newspaper, their heads bent together over the crossword. A delivery man laughed with the cook in a voice full of Friday. I felt the humble mercy of ordinary life moving along, making room for us without staring. "I don't want there to be confusion," I said finally, "about what this is." "It's not confusion," he said. "It's clarity. You reminded me that honesty can live inside respect. We can keep both." I took that in with a small breath. "Then we should set good fences," I said, the phrase coming to me from my father's old advice about neighbors and yards. Not to shut things out, but to protect what matters. "Agreed," he said, almost smiling. "I'll be the neighbor who brings over jam and knocks before entering." That made me laugh, and the sound felt like opening a window. The waitress returned with a plate of lemon pie split into 2 triangles. "On the house," he said. "You both look like you could use something bright." We ate small, careful bites, and I could taste the kindness more than the lemon. Before we left, Mark reached into his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table, not pushing it toward me, just making it reachable. "What's this?" I asked. "A note I wrote to myself last winter," he said. "I kept it in my wallet because I was afraid I'd forget what I promised. I think it belongs with you now." I opened it. In neat block letters, he'd written, "Pay attention to the ordinary. It's where the truth hides." Underneath, a smaller line, "Tell the people who steady you that they do." I looked up, and he was watching me carefully, with none of yesterday's careful distance, only steadiness. "Thank you," I said, "for trusting me with that." He shook his head. "Thank you for giving me a reason to mean it." On the drive back, the sun finally found its courage and broke through in thin, forgiving beams. The road steamed, and the dash lit up with that soft, late-morning glow that makes you forgive the day for starting slow. When he pulled into my driveway, we didn't linger. We didn't need to. We understood what we'd decided, and the decision held like a knot, tied cleanly, no frayed ends. After he left, I stood in the yard and listened to the rainwater move through the gutters, a silver thread you can hear but not see. I went inside and called my husband. He answered on the third ring with that familiar mixture of fatigue and affection. We spoke about practical things first, his meetings, the traffic, the soup I'd make when he came home, and then I asked if we could take a drive together when he returned. "Just us," I said. "No errands. I want to show you the back roads near the county line. There's a diner I think you'll like." He was quiet for a beat, and when he spoke his voice had that surprised softness I hadn't heard in a while. "I'd like that, Nance. I'd like that very much." The days between that call and his return unfolded with a dignity I hadn't felt in some time. I moved through the house with less hurry, more noticing. I finally fixed the drawer that stuck in the hallway table. I trimmed the roses, not because anyone would see them, but because I would. When I passed the mirror, I paused long enough to register my own face, not as a problem to solve, but as a companion to greet. It felt small and radical at once. When my husband finally came home, the evening light was tilted and golden. He set his suitcase by the door and kissed my cheek twice, as if the first was for travel and the second for return. We drove with the windows cracked, letting the cool air ribbon through the car. I told him about the new traffic light near the school and the diner with the crumb stripe. He told me about a colleague's new grandchild and the way the baby's fingers curled around the corner of his tie. We didn't speak in the careful way of people avoiding a subject. We spoke like people remembering how to include each other. At the diner, we chose a booth near the window, the same one, and I ordered the lemon pie just to see if it tasted the same at a different hour. I told him I'd been feeling quiet. He nodded, and his eyes looked wet without being tearful. "I know," he said, "and I didn't know what to do with it. I thought giving you space was love. Maybe I mistook distance for respect." "That can happen," I said. "I'd let it happen too. Maybe we can choose differently." He reached across the formica and touched the edge of my plate with a single finger, a gesture so slight I almost missed it. "Let's choose differently," he said. We didn't draw a map or list rules. We simply promised to pay attention, to call each other back from the quiet when silence stopped being restful and started being exile. On the way home, we took the longer route through the streets that wound like old ribbon. The road was still damp in places that the sun hadn't touched. The tires made a sound like a low sigh. I thought of Mark then, not with tugging or confusion, but with gratitude. He had returned something to me that wasn't his to keep, the reminder that my voice had weight, that my days could be shaped from the inside out. A week later, we had everyone over for dinner. My husband, Mark, my sister-in-law with her easy laugh, a handful of cousins. The house filled with the joyful racket of overlapping stories and the click of ice against glasses. Mark arrived with a small cardboard box. He handed it to me in the kitchen while the roast rested on the counter. "It's not a big thing," he said, almost sheepish. "Just something I saw on my way here." Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue, was a little terracotta pot with a rosemary plant barely taller than my hand. The scent rose clean and green. There was a card beneath the pot with a single line. "For the windowsill. Fully ordinary." I set the rosemary by the sink where the afternoon would find it. "It's perfect," I said, and we didn't need to add anything. In the living room, my husband called for everyone to bring their plates. The game was on, the second quarter just starting. We carried the food in and found places on couches and chairs. The room glowed with that uncomplicated warmth you only get when everybody knows where the forks are and whose laugh will start first. Later, when the house had thinned and the dishwasher hummed its steady song, my husband stood beside me at the sink. "That rosemary smells like the hills near your grandmother's house," he said, rinsing a glass. "It does," I said. "Maybe we should drive out there when the weather clears." "Let's," he answered. "Let's keep choosing the longer route." That night, before I turned off the lamp, I unfolded the paper Mark had given me, the one with the promise about the ordinary. I slid it into the back of my cookbook, the one with butter stains and penciled notes, because that's where it belonged, between a good recipe and a memory you can taste if you close your eyes. I thought about all the roads I've driven in my life and how some of them are short and some surprise you with an extra mile at the end. You never know which stretch will ask you to slow down and look. I don't pretend that one car ride solved everything. Most of life is not solved. It's tended. But I know this. What he said on the road opened a window I didn't realize had been painted shut. The air that moved through changed the temperature of the whole house. I still water the rosemary in the mornings. I still stand at the sink and watch the sky throw its funny colors against.